Russia continues with its aggressive behavior.
Russia violated the Budapest Memorandum.
The propaganda and the cyber attacks.
The U.S. Senate committee wraps up a hearing on relations with Russia, agreeing that a harsh and hostile stance needs to be pursued. We look at the facts behind the committee's claims. President Trump accuses federal judges of putting U.S. national security at risk after an appeals panel refuses to reinstate his temporary ban on travelers from 7 Muslim-majority countries. And anti-American banners and posters are waved as tens of thousands of people gather in cities across Iran to mark the anniversary of the Iranian Revolution. It's midday here in Moscow, and you're watching RT International Live with me, Nadira Tudor. Welcome to the program. U.S. senators have been discussing the future of relations with Russia at a Foreign Relations Committee hearing. While there was talk about rebuilding trust and cooperation, the overwhelming tone of the meeting was accusatory.
Russia is doing everything it can to undermine our democratic institutions.
Attack on our country by Russia.
The propaganda and the cyber attacks.
Russia violated the Budapest Memorandum when it invaded Ukraine.
It's trying to divide Europe from within. It's trying to divide Europe from the United States.
Russia has joined the Syrian civil war on the side of the Assad regime, participating in the destruction of hospitals and schools and targeting civilians.
Russia continues with its aggressive behavior in its immediate neighborhood and beyond.
RT's Washington correspondent, Kana Chichikan, looks at the facts behind the committee's claims.
At the hearing, U.S. lawmakers had a chance to say everything they thought about Russia, and it turned into a big Russia-bashing session. There were some assertions that seemed to lack context in a significant way. For example, it was said that most of Russia's operations in Syria were against moderate rebels, and only a small part against ISIL here.
In Syria, Russia has a hierarchy of what they're trying to do, and getting after ISIL is the last of that hierarchy. It's propping up the murderous regime of Assad. It is then getting after the moderate opposition.
Jim Jatras, former Senate Republican policy advisor, with me today. Jim, from that hearing, one could take away that in Syria there was only ISIL and moderate rebels. Is that the case?
Of course not. As you mentioned, this was a complete hate Russia session. I was waiting for them to blame Russia for sinking the Titanic and the Pearl Harbor attack. The fact is that none of the groups, so-called moderates in Syria, are anything but having a Salafist ideology, a terrorist methodology. They didn't talk about al-Nusra Front, which is basically al-Qaeda. They didn't, Jaish al-Islam, al-Sham, all these other groups are terrorist groups.
Here's another assertion from the hearing. European partners are fearful that Russia might affect their elections through hacking. Here.
There will be several elections in Europe next year. The signals we're getting from those allies is that they're already seeing a spike in Russian cyber activity.
Do you think at this point there's enough ground to believe Russia may do such a thing in Europe?
Not in my opinion. I'm sure there are people in Europe who are worried about this, but I think part of it is based on the hype about supposed hacking of the American election. The reports that were released in the last few months by the Obama administration don't prove anything of the sort. There's been no real evidence presented, but certainly just the reports themselves are enough to scare the Europeans, along with the other hype we keep throwing out there about the Russian threat, which is why we need these maneuvers on Russia's borders and so forth.
They say the proof, the evidence is in the classified.
Sure, yes, but we'll never see that. Sources and methods, let's move on. Just trust us, just like you can trust us on weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and so forth. Trust us on Benghazi.
There was something said at the hearing that we RT can independently fact check, and that is our budget. Here.
The Russia Today office in Washington alone has a $400 million budget.
Meanwhile, RT says its total budget for the year 2017 is $316 million. Total budget. Our press office provides that information to anyone who asks. why not ask, where do you think they're getting the numbers? Where does that $400 million in Washington alone come from?
Well, if they have the evidence that that's the real number, I suspect it will be as invisible as the information about the Russian hacking. Where's the proof? Are we ever going to see it? Totally classified, if it exists at all. And look, as far as the official number, what the RT says, look, you can check our budget, here it is. They can make the claim, present no proof for it. You can show all the numbers you want officially, and it won't make any difference to anybody making those accusations.
Jim, thank you.
Thank you.
It's not analysis, it's hard numbers publicly available. It would help to get that right, at least. In Washington, I'm Ganesh Chekhan, RT.